really a pleasure to be here this morning, at least this morning in San Francisco, and I'll try to give you some viewpoints and some lessons learning from my journey. I've been very fortunate to be part of a lot of interesting startups, but that was not how it started. Kind of like I actually wanted to be a musician. And kind of like that's my big passion, and you will kind of like see a little bit more of that passion still comes through when it comes to how I pick company names. So like ForgeRock, there's a reason there's a rock in there. The problem with this dream was that after a gig, we normally had a bigger tap in the bar than we got from playing. So the business model didn't change or scale basically. So I had to do something, and but there's a lot of similarities here, and I think one of the things being a CTO is that I'm just born curious, and this is all about kind of like either you want to start a band or start a company, finding, investing in new technologies, building new teams. Is that kind of like what wakes me up in the morning? And it's not that I'm scared of anything; is I'm just what has I been missing, kind of like when I was sleeping. So the whole fear of missing out is probably why I don't sleep so much. And of course, being a regular employee in a company, it works for some people. It didn't work for me, so I took this not a U-turn, but at least kind of like a turn to the right. And it's kind of funny again. I've been using a lot of band metaphors, and I'm still using that from our management style. It's when it comes to a company or a band, it's basically all about execution, and it's all about the people. And kind of like if you have the best people in the band, you go up there on the stage and you perform, and you get the audience to really dig in. It's not only the audience have a great time, which could be your customer, but it's also your company, your employees, your teammates. So having the people, the best people, it's basically kind of like the core to everything. It's core to execution. And this company, I honestly I didn't have a very clear understanding what I was doing, but I knew if I had the best people, cool things will happen. I think also there's a lot of kind of like different types of CTOs out there, and I think everything actually could work. But I think there's two main categories. You have CTOs that are brilliant technically and the smartest people in the room in their technology area, and I think that can work for a lot of companies. But mainly, I think it works more if your product is a little bit more narrow. If you're building kind of like a big kind of like cloud platform, which involves a lot of technologies, I think it's really, really hard for the CTO to be on top of everything. So then again, it boils back to getting the best people and hire them and get the band together and perform. Um, how you get this together and also how you keep people, it's all about culture and the way you think, the way you act, and the way you interact. And there's no need or reason for having a stupid poster on the wall. Honestly, the culture of your company comes out of your manager's eyes. So the way you are behaving is actually forming and setting the culture. And you can't just be funny one day a week or once a year. The way you think, the way you act and interact is actually forming the culture you are building. I think that's really important to keep in mind, and people will watch you. For me, culture even starts with with a name. I mentioned that Fort Rock was kind of like the rock part there was basically out of again my passion for music, and even if my new startup, I spent a lot of time putting this name together. And indie, it's all about independent, the independent rock scene. People like Nirvana, of course, famous, and my favorite band is Foo Fighters. So that's that passion for actually go out and do something disruptive and don't care about the major labels. And then you have Kite, going fast, going high. It's extreme, which of course what a startup is all about, and also what a CTO is all about. It's go big or go home in my mind. Um, for culture perspective, where my passion is to try to bring everybody into the culture and having an exclusive culture, and don't do the old-fashioned kind of like enterprise sales company stuff that you have sales kickoff only for the sales guy, you have president club only for a handful of the sales guys. If you are building an exclusive culture, everybody should join. And the way we are doing that, both with ForgeRock and also now, is take everybody in the company on a tour. And it's a week. We go somewhere nice and actually starting to create that insane combination of trust and relationship and also feeling of belonging together. And of course, we have a lot of fun while doing it, and we haven't been shy when it actually comes on to making sure that we spend a lot of time in building the employee and the company branding and image. Um, and so just a few other examples. Of course, again, back to the music stuff. For us, it was all about going on the tour, and we went to great locations. And from a recruitment perspective, when your people are really, really proud, they're bragging about where they're doing, what they're doing, where they are, sending out all these fantastic pictures on social media, we get a lot of incoming people say, I also want to work with a company like this, because it actually has passion, it has innovation, it has a culture, and it's very inclusive. And also the good thing about music, it's I think I haven't met anybody that don't like at least some type of music. So it's a very common international language to use for communicating and having a platform. Um, and of course, on these trips, when you have everybody together, it's all about to creating this shared story and moments that people can talk about not only with their spouse, their family, their friends, and other people, but actually have a common ground. And this stupid picture is from one of the ideas that we just came up with. We had a keynote speaker in the morning, and he told a story about a trip they made, and they had a problem. They were never wanted back to the hotel because it was not due to all the partying or the food fight, but it was basically the camel in the swimming pool. Um, so it took me 3 minutes. I looked at the CMO, he looked at me, and we left the room. And 3 hours after, we actually rented a camel. I got it in the back door in the hotel. And of course, during lunch, I walked through the whole lunch area with a camel and looking for the pool. And the only problem doing this kind of things is kind of like, what are you doing next year? Because the expectations are growing, but it creates this stories that everybody kind of like can remember, and they talk about it still kind of like 5 years after. Um, I've been very fortunate to have been working in one of the Silicon Valley's most innovative companies. Rest in peace, Sun Microsystems, but also had a really good mentor, and which also became a good friend of mine, Scott McNeely. And this looks really simple, but it is actually really, really powerful. Creating this culture where you of course having fun, you go out there, you kick your competitors ass, be very, very, very professional when it comes to delivering customer success, and love your customer. Don't cheat, don't do this stupid kind of like one-off and think you get away with it. Be fair, don't cheat. And when it comes to keep your butt in the corner, I think you should decide which technologies, what kind of company you want to be. Because if you're trying to do everything, you're going to compete with everybody, and you can't do everything by yourself. So figure out what you want to do, stay focused, do that, and then partner with the missing bits and pieces. So pretty simple business plan, but actually really powerful, and kind of like easy for your team to remember and build both values and ethics around. Innovation as a CTO, this is kind of make it or break it. And sadly, we kind of like we see in some companies that kind of like either forgot to innovate. Of course, you also have successful companies that have more money than brain power, so they innovate by acquisition. That could also work if you have a lot of money. But I think from a technology perspective, being a CTO, focus on innovation and not and actually lead, don't follow, is the way to kind of like be a category leader in your space, like ForgeRock actually became. Um, this is, of course, probably known to all of you guys. As you grow, a lot of companies kind of like grow into this innovator's dilemma. You have a lot of customers, good kind of like recurring revenue coming in, and a lot of those customers just want a little bit more what they already got, and you kind of like end up in this incremental innovation instead of actually be awake enough to figure out when new stuff arrive and you actually need to move fast before you become outdated. And I think these two statements kind of like talks for itself. And another thing, be aware of, there is, I've met several people kind of like in my career that kind of like were thinking about that everything basically they could do it better themselves, and kind of like not sharing, not actually using stuff that already exists, and kind of like ended up to spending a lot of time reinvent the wheel instead of being a little bit more pragmatic, using stuff that already exists, work with somebody else and build something which is actually larger than yourself. And for me, the key kind of a vehicle to all this is open source. Uh, Building a technology company, being a CTO, building something that's larger than your own team, sharing and also innovating, this is where it happens. So I'm a big believer in open source, and there's absolutely many ways of also be commercial successful, even if your code is open source. And I think kind of the last decade or so, you see so many unicorns out there, IPOs, successful IPOs that have been open source companies. So that old saying that kind of like open source is free and you can't make it commercial, and it's basically a service company. I think that is totally wrong. Open source is all about innovation. It's about inclusive in building something larger than yourself, and actually could also be very successful on a commercial perspective. So where is my brain going now? And of course, things are changing all the time. Some things are changing faster, and something is taking more time. But it's all these new things that pop up, of course, create new opportunities. And one of the big thing everybody talk about now is Web 3.0. And honestly, but the 3.0 concept has been on been kind of like on the roadmap, and people are talking about it for a very long time. But you see some of the core basic concepts around it is now actually getting more and more focus and also speed and investment behind it. When we started, like way back, nobody actually cared about privacy. Now people actually really care about stuff. People would like to have a very personal experience when they are online or getting a service, as long as it's transparent and it's not abused, and you can share the data and what you want to share, and you can also revoke it at your own convenience. And the whole thing about decentralization, there's so many good reasons for doing that. And of course, Even if you kind of like if looking from a security perspective alone, making these huge databases of identity data that are in a centralized location, it's a honeypot. Everybody want to go in and actually try to breach it. And yeah, you all know like what happened to some of the large vendors out there recently, and decentralization is one of the ways of actually avoiding that concept on that issue. I think another thing around this is that you don't need to kind of like the whole aspect of, I think, data lake is basically dead, because you don't need to have all the information in one place to actually be able to make decisions or recommendations or what you want to do. And some of the technologies that kind of came along, I would say, commercially really successful over the last 5 years is graph technologies. And the capability a graph platform or technology underneath your services can be extremely powerful. And but this is new technology that has been growing really fast and got a lot of attention over the last 5 years. I think the most important thing then for using this is also that you need to build knowledge on top of it. So where am I going? Still very focused on identity. And identity is more than identity of humans. There's more bots out there. There's more services out there. There's more Internet of Things out there than human beings. And guess what? They all have identities, and there's no difference whatsoever on a human identity or a digital twin of a device. And they all are connected. They have relationships. They come and go, and things are not static anymore. And that's why you need to move to new technology, for instance, leveraging graph, and not put your whole business model into an LDAP schema, which is very rigid and really hard to deal with real-time decision based on context. Web 3.0, a lot of those concepts are really on emerge. It's not only on kind of like what is the question, and the answer is blockchain. Web 3.0 is so much more about it. At the same time, for a very long time, a lot of the identity data and authentication system and stuff is still going to be centralized. Like Google, Facebook, big banks will not go away tomorrow. So there needs to be kind of like some kind of like interaction, coexistence between the old centralized world where we are now to the total kind of like SSI network. And just as a fun fact for you guys out there, 70% of all SSI networks are actually on centralized servers, and they still somehow need to establish trust somewhere. So but there's a lot of good things coming on out in this space. And last but not least, it's all about data and understanding the data and looking on identity data, digital kind of like twins as business assets and not a liability, and create fantastic new experience and services for everything which is online, being your car, being your house, being your family, whatever. But it's also about connected data and how this changes from day to day, from minute to minute, based on context. So this is my bet for the future, and I probably went extremely fast now. But my last advice here is that as a CTO, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you can't have a plan B. If you doing and betting on a technology, and you at the same time are putting a plan B together, you are not believing in what you're doing. And this picture is from a place very close to my home in Norway, and which is the most famous place for base jumping in Europe. And of course, if you go on top of that mountain and you jump out, there is no plan B. Either you land safely or you die. Um, so I think just do it. No plan B. You need to believe in what you're doing, your innovation, make bets, uh, and of course, all the time when trying to innovate and run your team, you will learn and you will get new data. And based on that new data, you're probably going to change your plan A constantly on new knowledge and new data. But having a plan B is absolutely the wrong way of going, in at least in my mind and what I've experienced. So I'll leave you with that, guys. I don't know if we are opening up for questions or so.
Thank you so much, Lasse. That was amazing.
Pretty
And I'm actually a musician myself, so you were really speaking to me there. It was really fun to hear the parallels. And go Foo Fighters.
I totally, and it's kind of also when you're putting a band together or a company together, there has to be
Yeah,
there has to be diversity. And I'm setting like being a manager for Keith Richard was probably not easy, but they're still the biggest rock and roll band in on the planet. So yeah,
right.
embrace diversity in every way you can.
Absolutely. No, and you're so right because it's that creative tension, between the two different sort of competing musical sensibilities, as I'm sure you know. I mean, even with Pink Floyd, right? That was a great example of Roger Waters and David Gilmour, and they were just constantly at odds. And they even I'm sure you know this, but their final song was actually born out of a fight they had, right?
Yep.
And then here comes constantly no yeah, that was the last one, right? So it was yeah, it was definitely it's interesting because it happens too. And we were getting in the musical weeds, and I'm sure other people don't like music or like, oh god. But but it's true even in a business context, right? If you don't have those sort of competing different ideas and people have different perspectives and viewpoints, and that can be, traditional diversity, but that can even just be where you come from, right? Where you were born, where you were raised, where you've lived. It gives you a different kind of idea of how you're going to see the world in a different lens. And all of those things come into play when you're building something, even on the tech side, right? Because you're going to have these competing sensibilities, but it's through those sort of, like creative frictions that we actually develop new solutions that would never have been possible if it were just one person or the other, right? It's that kind of that that friction, that tension that actually, gives birth to something it would never have come to life otherwise.
Yeah.
So really important points that you're making there for sure.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And kind of like that's what it's all about, innovation. And for my own things, I have no ego whatsoever. If somebody comes in and come up with a good kind of like argument or good idea or something, so shit,
Yeah.
forget what I just said. Based on what you're telling me, I learned something.
Yeah.
Let's change plan A because
Yeah.
that's how innovation actually happens. If you have to always have to
100%.
be the smartest guy in the room, I think you're going to lose out on a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and they've actually done studies on, the fact that kind of basically they did it was 100 product teams, and they studied them and found that the teams that had more diversity, and also more sort of creative tension were the ones that were the most innovative. So I mean it's really important, I think, what you're saying.
Yeah. What's what I
It's
think
it's the fabric of it.
it is, and also the whole thing about a lot of focus on the ID versus kind of executions. I normally what I say is kind of if you're the only person on the planet that has this brilliant ID, I think it's one out of two. It's either you way too early, or it's a stupid
Mm.
idea. So again, it's execution and team is what it takes, and listen and learn.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important too, you're making a point of bringing people on who are gonna challenge you, and not that you want people that are gonna argue with you or where it's
No,
gonna be contentious, that's not what we're going for, but I think what you're saying is, bring people on who are gonna think through all the angles that you didn't think through,
yeah,
either because you didn't have time, right? Or you just don't have the bandwidth, or it's just not the way you normally think, and then suddenly that person says, "Hey, did you think about XYZ?" And you go, "Oh, no, I didn't. And thank you, because you're right, And so I actually like to hire those people as sort of a second brain that I bounce things off of and say, okay, I'm thinking about this because I know they're going to come to the table and say, did you think about da 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 da, right? And what is the thing that they'll fill in? And eventually sometimes you start to think, okay, like my go-to is Lana, and I think, okay, what would Lana think? But
yeah.
and then I can try to start using her brain, right? And start incorporating that. So yeah, it's really, really true.
And then as you know, as a CTO and also in other stuff, there's a reason why you have two ears and only one mouth.
Yes.
You should
Yes.
actually
No,
listen for Christ's sake, and then before you
yeah,
speak.
100%. No, and you get so many great ideas from the other people, and then back to the point that we made before, then you get their buy-in to it because they feel invested that they're actually contributing their gift to the company by bringing the full force of their intellectualism, their heart, their blood, sweat, and tears. It makes them feel like they're valued, and so you're not just listening, but you're also showing them that you respect and value them and their time.
Yeah, and expanded that kind of like beyond the boundaries of your own company, kind of like, of course, from for an open source and having the community and peers and collaborating on them, or again sharing stories in your own community.
Mm,
You need to build something that is larger than the limitations of your own little team or your company.
yeah. So this is a little bit of a strange abstract question, but I feel like as a musician you can handle this. What's the favorite kind of song or album that you've written on the tech side? And how did it come about with this kind of creative tension that we're talking about?
On the tech side, you mean?
Yeah. So I'm asking you to kind of to extrapolate from your musician self and then say, okay, on the tech side, it looked like this, just to put it together for people who might not be musicians like us.
Again, it's that creative process that kind of like and making a song or kind of like coming up with new architecture design or technologies is the process you go through and how you actually embracing that. And I don't there's a very good kind of like documentary on Beatles. I don't know if it's on Netflix or where it is, but see how
Mhm.
we made those masterpieces and how the process actually works. And again, it's not about arguing or me being right or me being wrong. It's just inclusive, and I think that's exactly the same things that happens when I kind of like my team is from engineering is building new stuff. It's just that again that learning and be very open to and listen to new ideas before you try to shoot them down and finding something which is wrong about them. So
Right.
it's very the same thing, like creating new tech or creating a new hit song. It's the same process.
Right, right. Yeah, I know with that fight that they had that led to Comfortably Numb, it was that David Gilmour thought what Roger Waters doing was way too ambitious and too flowery and too dramatic. And of course, Roger Waters was the dramatic one for anybody who's a music fan. And David Gilmour was the more polished actual musician, who was very technically savvy. And so then David Gilmour was like, well, but I think that this is too grandiose. We need to add just some basic stuff here. And then so of course in their music you get that, right? You see that there's this super ambitious over the top drama, but then there's this very technically proficient, very solid music that's happening. And so I think with the tech it would look the same, right? Where you've got some people that are, and oftentimes I know as CTOs, you're dealing with CEOs and founders who tend to be these visionary wild cards who have these grandiose ideas. And you're like, oh my God, I can't believe they think we can do this. And you're tasked with being the David Gilmour, right? You have to come in and say, okay, well, technically we need to do da 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 to make this make sense. And so, but that juxtaposition and that tension between the sort of flying off into the wilderness CEO founder with you as a CTO, and sometimes as a CTO you're going to be that person, and you'll have other technical people who come in to fill in under you and say, did you think through like how we're going to do this part? And so, but yeah, it does. I mean, we need each other, I think, is really what we're saying here. And it's good to remember that
I
as
think
a
also
leader.
the other thing is kind of like again, like being a CTO and founder of a software company. You can do whatever you want. It's software. Kind of like if you don't know how to do it, it's basically because of your knowledge. It's software for
Mm,
Christ's sake. You can fix it. So there's no stupid ideas. It may be a stupid idea from a commercial perspective or adoption, but actually with software you can do whatever you want. So
yep.
there's no limitations. And sometimes, of course, you need to make bets. And again, back to the music. If you look on Queen with Bohemian Rhapsody, everybody says, "You're crazy. Are you actually putting in a song which is like 11 or 13 minutes, and you have
Yeah.
Oprah in the middle?" This, and then again, it's the
Yeah.
most sold kind of like song in on the planet. So, but of
Right.
course, sometimes, so you need to make bets. You're not gonna win all of them, but if you don't make those bets, you're not learning and you're not innovating. If you're trying to save everything.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a really important balance to strike there, I think. Well, any other parallels that you can help us draw between, how to apply this sort of creative musical component into the tech side? Any advice or any words of wisdom, I guess we should say.
No, but I think it's a little bit. I already said it, that diversity perspective, like they they're all different, and kind of like and sometimes you meet really brilliant engineers, and managers have problem managing them, and they kind of like they think that is the problem, but that then the manager is a problem, if you know what I mean. You're paid for actually handling musician, rock stars, people that are could be very demanded, but they are brilliant. So
Yeah.
if so, you should actually embrace that. And again, back to the Keith Richard kind of like stuff. He was probably not easy to manage, but again, they are one of the largest rock and roll band in the history, and that diversity
Right.
is a good thing. You don't have
Right.
every
Right.
if everybody in the team is saying yes, you have a problem.
Yes. Agreed. Too many yes men does not breed innovation, that's for sure.
It does absolutely not.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much, Lass. This has been a really fun talk and really insightful. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And good luck.
Absolutely.
Go out there, kick ass, and have fun, everybody.